Ever since I started my YouTube channel nearly 10 years ago, I knew at some point, in some way, I wanted to do an in-depth retrospective series on the Twisted Metal games. Twisted Metal was the first video game franchise I was exposed to growing up, with the original PlayStation as my first home console. I remember Twisted Metal 3 being the first, or one of the first games, my brother and I ever owned in our collection. We fell in love with all the Twisted Metal games on the PS1, would play them extensively, pumping countless hours into their insane, over-the-top levels, and explosive, pulse-pounding, vehicular combat gameplay. Twisted Metal had a flavor all its own, a very unique identity. It was grungy, in your face, erratic, and oftentimes psychotic. I think it came around and existed at just the right time, before the new millennia. Something about it clicked, fell into place. It had the heartbeat of the mid to late 1990s, more so than a lot of games I can remember, bled that style with its heavy metal, trashy aesthetic, and scrappiness to everything. Its existence in time was simply magic, beautifully disfigured magic. To me, Twisted Metal was never just about the hard-hitting gameplay, though. Sure, driving around and blasting your opponents to oblivion with mounted machine guns and missile launchers was fun, but there needed to be a central narrative fueling everything. There needed to be a strong reason for each of these vehicles to be there, and why their drivers felt the need to risk their lives behind the wheel of them, on top of just being mentally unstable in most instances. With Twisted Metal, I always valued its story, the motivations it gave all of its eccentric characters, as simple and one-dimensional as they may have been sometimes. Every game in the Twisted Metal series centers around an elaborate demolition derby, the Twisted Metal tournament held every year, implementing the use of missiles, machine guns, and mines, all of which are in the form of pickups for your vehicle that can be found scattered throughout the various battle arenas. Several psychologically compromised individuals compete in the competition, driving around in their own vehicles that are more or less extensions of themselves. The same goes for their vehicles' unique special weapons. After successfully eliminating all of their opponents, the winner of the Twisted Metal tournament is granted one wish, anything they desire, by its mysterious host Calypso, who possesses demon-like abilities. These wishes play out in similar fashion to the classic monkey's paw, be careful what you wish for type of scenario, in that the wishes usually have a double meaning to them, lead to some sort of dark irony, and come at an ultimate price for the character making them. These wishes are the heart and soul of Twisted Metal in my opinion. Without them, and the wide cast of characters making them, there isn't Twisted Metal. In this new, retrospective series I'm making, I will not only be reviewing each game in the Twisted Metal franchise, expressing my overall thoughts and opinions on them regarding their various strengths and weaknesses as they relate to gameplay, music, visuals, and story, but I also want to get a bit more extensive and personal with it all as well. I'll be going into my favorite and least favorite levels in each game, characters, vehicles, special weapons, and, in each installment of this series, rank every ending, every wish, made by the drivers in each game. This retrospective has been a long time coming, and I think it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun for me, hopefully for all of you watching as well. The first entry in the Twisted Metal series was initially released in November of 1995. Twisted Metal, developed by the Utah-based Singletrack, was one of the first titles on the original PlayStation to be released outside of Japan. It was also heavily featured in the marketing campaign to debut the console in North America, making Twisted Metal one of Sony's first mascot franchises for the PlayStation. The inspiration for Twisted Metal came about when a group of its lead designers were stuck in a traffic jam on the way back from a meeting. They envisioned their car shooting guns and missiles at the other vehicles, engaging in high-stakes car combat. The concept was simple, brilliant, and hadn't really been done before in video games. The idea was pitched, and Sony was on board for it, going by various names throughout its development, like Urban Assault, Cars and Rockets, and most notably High Octane. Twisted Metal would have a reported budget of around $850,000, and would be completed within a strict 12-month deadline. As much as I love the Twisted Metal franchise, and the first installments in any game series should be viewed with a soft lens, considered classic and legendary for what they would evidently give rise to, I don't think anyone would deny the fact that Twisted Metal 1 is very rough around the edges. Revisiting it now, after all these years, leaves a lot to be desired, but for a game made on a modest budget and within a very strict time window, it's a lot better than it had any right to be. It overcame the odds, fought tooth and nail with its back against the wall, and found success, found its voice. While not the hardest game in the franchise, whether you are playing this series for the first time or are more familiar with the newer installments, I think Twisted Metal 1 has a steep learning curve to it. I wouldn't call it user-friendly. The controls are very clunky, even for seasoned Twisted Metal veterans like myself. The vehicles in TM1, as well as its direct sequel, handle as though they are bars of soap sliding around a bathtub. To drive and steer your vehicle, you use the directional buttons. This was before the days of analog sticks, folks. If the D-pad is too much of a hassle, you can also accelerate with square and reverse with circle. I never do that though, because the sharp turn handbrake is done by pressing X, and if you want any chance of survival in this game, and to properly line up your shots, you're going to have to master it. Pivoting your vehicle with X while accelerating and steering with the D-pad is your best option. Even still, I find myself missing with some of my weapons. The controls in this game are just way too slippery. If you need to go faster, you can press and hold triangle to activate your turbo. If you run out, you will need to pick up more. Your primary weapons are your mounted machine guns, which are fired using R2. They are the weakest attack in your arsenal, and holding the R2 button down for too long will result in the guns overheating. After picking up additional weapons, like missiles, mines, and the like, you can fire them with L2. This is also how you activate your special weapon, which replenishes itself over time, a brilliant aspect of Twisted Metal's design that ensured you almost always had something to fire at your opponent and keep the action going. Toggling weapons is done with R1 and L1. One thing I have always found annoying about the original Twisted Metal is that after you empty one of your weapon slots, the game doesn't automatically cycle to the next one for you. It's something that takes a bit of time to adjust to. In later games, you could just empty your entire arsenal on an opponent if you wanted to, mash that L2 button in a pinch. Here, you have to remember to keep cycling to each new weapon yourself. Kind of a pain. The weapon selection in the first Twisted Metal is pretty limited, but it was the first entry in the series, so you have to cut it some slack. You have the standard options here: fire missiles, power missiles, homing missiles. The homing ones are a bit overpowered in this game, in my opinion. They do too much damage. The freeze missile is its own pickup here. Later games would make it a form of energy attack, along with jump, shield, rear attack, and invisibility, among others. An exclusive weapon to Twisted Metal 1 is the oil spill, which slows an enemy's movement. It's another way to stun their vehicle essentially, before landing stronger hits on them, but I'm glad the oil was removed from future entries. Not only was it bland and cliché, but once you had the ability to fire a freeze missile at them at any time to stun them, the oil became redundant. The only way to heal in Twisted Metal is by driving onto health or repair stations, marked on the radar with an X. There are only a set number of them in the battlefields, so you need to use them sparingly, though they do eventually reactivate if the battle lasts long enough. I like the idea of the platforms, but I much rather prefer the health pickups in later games. These platforms would return in Twisted Metal Black, which implemented them along with health pickups, the best of both worlds. You get 3 lives to complete 6 levels, no easy task. Like I mentioned, the loose controls are a challenge in this game. Lining up shots can be tricky, and slamming into walls does damage you, so keep that in mind. There are civilians, or I guess referees, as they are labeled in the manual, that walk around, fly on jetpacks, or pop out of manholes, that will fire guns and even rocket launchers at your vehicle. They can be kind of frustrating, and sway the outcomes of battles at times. Twisted Metal 1 is by no means impossible though, once you learn the layout of the levels and where certain weapon pickups are located, mainly those OP homing missiles. Many of the early Twisted Metal games use a password system as well, so you can easily restart levels with a full life pool if you fail, or need to turn the game off and continue it later. I've been able to beat Twisted Metal 1 numerous times. It's the sequel you should be scared of. That one is a tough son of a bitch, the hardest in the franchise, bar none, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The roster in Twisted Metal is pretty solid, totaling 12, introducing a lot of staple characters that would go on to make several appearances in the franchise moving forward. You've got Sweet Tooth, the ice cream truck, the face of the Twisted Metal series, driven by an escaped mental patient and serial killer dressed as a clown named Needles Kane. While I'm not against the more zanier, mechanical-looking, Transformer-like designs for the ice cream truck in later installments, I've always preferred the simpler and blocky ones from the earlier Twisted Metals. Sweet Tooth has one of the strongest special weapons in the game, a napalm cone launcher, which is the special he has continued to use in almost every entry in the series. One of my favorite Twisted Metal characters is the taxicab Yellow Jacket, driven by the lonely New York cab driver Charlie Kane. This was Yellow Jacket's only appearance in the Twisted Metal games until the release of Black in 2001. The car's stats are balanced across the board. It's a great starting choice to use, and its special weapon is a thrown Molotov cocktail. Another character in this game that wouldn't appear playable again for several years afterwards is Darkseid, the massive semi-truck. Its driver is a powerful demonic figure from the underworld, possibly even the devil himself, named Mr. Ash. He was responsible for the creation of a few demon characters in Twisted Metal's mythology, like Black, and most likely Minion as well. Darkseid's stats are pretty shitty, except for the max armor. The special weapons in Twisted Metal 1 aren't very balanced, and leave a lot to be desired. Darkseid's is a quick beam of white fire from hell, called the Death Blast, but it's the exact same as Crimson Fury's armor-melting laser, the Crimson Blade, just a different color. I hate when the Twisted Metal games recycle special moves for multiple vehicles, especially in the same game. Next up is Outlaw, the patrol car, driven by Los Angeles police officer Sergeant Carl Roberts. Its special weapon is a 360-degree taser that circles the entire vehicle until it makes contact with another. Thumper is a purplish-pink 1964 Impala lowrider, driven by an LA local named Bruce Cochran. Its Scorcher flamethrower is incredibly strong and will fry you to a crisp within seconds. Crimson Fury is a red sports car, the fastest in the game, driven by Agent Stone, hired by a mysterious, unnamed organization to compete in the Twisted Metal tournament. Another driver hired to compete is Angelina Fortin, driving the dune buggy Pit Viper that is equipped with an acid launcher called the Sizzle. We've got the military vehicle Warthog, driven by the U.S. Army's Commander Mason. Its special weapon is the iconic tri-homing missiles. In Twisted Metal 1, they are all the same color, but later games would make them red, white, and blue, and the vehicle would emit a patriotic sound when it fired them. Mr. Grimm, another one of my personal favorites, is the only motorcycle featured in the game. Seeing as his body is entirely exposed, his armor level is the weakest of any character, but he more than makes up for it with his speed, handling, and powerful special move, which has him launch spirits from his bike that come from the other side. Spectre is a 1965 Chevy Corvette driven by a ghost named Scott Campbell, named after one of the game's core developers. I don't know how a ghost would be able to effectively drive a car, but trust me, that's not the extent of the ridiculousness this series reaches with its drivers. You'll see. Spectre has one of my favorite special weapons spanning all of the games, the Phantom Burst, or Ghost Missile, that can travel across the map, even through walls, to reach its target. Pretty fucking badass, huh? The green monster truck Hammerhead is driven by two high school dropouts named Dave and Mike, who stumbled upon the vehicle somewhere and stole it. Its special weapon is called Crusher, which slams the monster truck on top of its opponents and crushes them underneath its giant wheels. And last, but certainly not least, we have the makeshift junkyard car Roadkill, driven by an army commando named Captain Spears. The fact that it's made from the pieces of fallen vehicles suits the character perfectly, something you'll understand in a few minutes when I get into the story and character motivations in this game. Anyways, Roadkill's special weapon is called a Steel Dagger, which fires a rusty metal javelin from its roof at lethal speeds. Despite Twisted Metal releasing in 1995, the game is set in the future, the distant year of, wait for it, 2005, on Christmas Eve to be exact. The Twisted Metal competition is in its 10th year of existence. Calypso has chosen to host it in Los Angeles. A few of the character endings make reference to signed contracts, meaning each competitor had been approached by either Calypso or one of his associates to sign what was essentially a blood pact to compete. The prologue in the game's manual also states that each contestant was sent an email invitation in the early hours of the morning that read in big flashing letters, "Will you drive?" Before I get into the 6 levels in this game, I do feel the need to mention something. While in no way do I find any of the stages in the original Twisted Metal to be bad or that I dislike them, none of them are extraordinary in my opinion. A few of them contain shortcuts and hidden little secrets, but for the most part they are very basic, very simplistic in design when compared to the later entries in the series, which of course makes sense. But because this game is set entirely in Los Angeles, it is very limited with the variety of environments it can offer that holds it back in a big way as well. The first level in Twisted Metal is called Arena Duel, set in an underground nightclub run by Calypso. It's the only level in tournament history to be a one-on-one affair, though you can type in a password for a hidden level that's this one, just with more enemies. The Arena Duel stage is pretty straightforward, the kind of environment that you would typically associate with a demolition derby. It's muddy, compact, with some ramps here and there. Its purpose is to get you familiar with the controls of the game, and not overwhelm you. There are no repair stations in this level because it's so small. Calypso can be seen watching over the battle in the background, and there are various trailers and shipping containers with the names of the contest's competitors spray-painted on the sides of them, presumably housing their vehicles and ammunition. The Arena Duel is the arrival point for the drivers, where their skill is tested and they fight for the right to compete in the tournament when they are let loose into the rest of the city. Level 2 is Warehouse District Warfare, where you engage 3 opponents in the Warehouse District of Los Angeles. A few small shops can also be seen. This level has a really simple layout to it. It's just a grid, but I like it. It's one of the first levels that pop into my head when I think of Twisted Metal 1. After the warehouse district, you make your way onto the LA freeway in Freeway Free-for-All. It's a giant highway loop that puts you up against 5 opponents. Originally, this level was supposed to be attached to the warehouse district one as one big arena, but was separated into 2 due to the AI taking far too long to find the player, an issue that would pop up in later games when the level sizes became so large that the lack of action began interfering with the gameplay. The 4th level in Twisted Metal is River Park Rumble, set in the entertainment district in downtown LA. There are Christmas trees, a skating rink, and even a Santa Claus you can run down, which is pretty funny. It's definitely the most colorful and busy of all the level designs in the game, and my personal favorite. If its layout looks familiar to you, it's because it was essentially remade in Twisted Metal Black as the downtown level. The hardest level in TM1 is without a doubt Assault on Suburbia. It's also the largest of the levels, taking place in an entire neighborhood with houses, schools, convenience stores, gas stations, and churches sprinkled about. It might be too large in areas, leading to a lot of dead periods where no action is happening. The reason Assault on Suburbia is the hardest level in the game is because you have a total of 8 enemies to defeat in it, the most in any of the stages. It can be quite grueling, and depending on which vehicle you have chosen or what difficulty you are playing on, the level can feel like an eternity, upwards of 15 minutes sometimes. I like this level. There is a lot to do in it. The flood control channel section of it is really cool, but yeah, it's a bit too big for its own good. If you manage to survive Assault on Suburbia, you move on to the final level in the game, Rooftop Combat, taking place atop the tallest skyscrapers in LA. The Twisted Metal franchise has a fondness for rooftop levels. Many installments feature them, some big and some small. Twisted Metal 1's is the most tame out of them all. Very simple in design, but there's still a lot of fun to be had in it. You can break the large pyramid-shaped ceiling of the main building. Falling down leads you to this foyer. You can shoot at the 4 plants to reveal extra weapons, before driving down the hallway and smashing through the glass window at the end. There's also a crane you can activate that drops this large crate filled with even more goodies. Rooftop combat as you take on 3 enemies before facing off with the game's final boss, Minion. He's a demon from hell who drives a black LAV 300 tank. Minion was the winner of the previous year's competition, the 9th Twisted Metal overall. He's a tough customer. His vehicle has the highest armor, handling, and special weapon damage in the game. His special weapon is all of them, randomly selected from the game's roster and fired, which is cheap as shit. Even if you manage to knock Minion off one of the rooftops, something that automatically kills any other contestant, he just respawns, minus a little damage, so there really isn't any way you can cheese it. Minion in Twisted Metal 1 is one of the more memorable final bosses from the series. He pops up several more times as a mid-game boss in later entries, and also becomes a playable character in them as well. His design would go through a few changes. His tank would have several different color schemes. I think having Minion in a Twisted Metal game is essential. He's one of the staples. He should always be one of the bosses, in my opinion. Minion and Twisted Metal go together like peanut butter and jelly. While there are only 3 opponents in the rooftop combat level at the end of Twisted Metal 1, if you use a password to reach it, you will have to fight them, plus Minion at the same time. It might sound easier that your opponents would fight amongst themselves and slowly chip away at Minion's health, but the AI in these early Twisted Metal games wasn't the brightest. Your opponents don't really engage each other. They focus only on the player themselves. Anywho, once Minion is destroyed, you take his title as the champion of Twisted Metal and claim your ultimate prize, your granted wish, from Calypso. The character endings in the original Twisted Metal are very crude, but a few of them are quite clever and worth your while. Due to the game's fast production and limited budget, the endings are in the form of scrolling text over a static image of Calypso, sitting on his throne made of car parts in an underground garage deep beneath Los Angeles. They then cut to your vehicle speeding off on an LA freeway. I gotta say, Calypso looks like absolute shit in Twisted Metal 1. I hate the frizzy hair and strip of white surrounding his burnt face. It's like they took a generic clown mask and then cut the face out of it. The burn makeup looks like mashed hamburger meat. While the scrolling text endings are the official canonical endings of Twisted Metal 1, there were live-action video endings that were shot for the game. They were filmed early on in development, as the Twisted Metal tournament is referred to as high octane in them. For that reason, and their poor production value and campiness, the endings were removed from the final version. The developers didn't have the budget or interest in shooting them all over again, and I don't blame them. But they live on through the internet and the extra twisted edition of Twisted Metal Head-On for the PlayStation 2. Most of the lost endings are the exact same as their text counterparts, with a few exceptions. Some I find stronger than their text versions, others I find weaker due to a variety of factors. To rank all of the character endings in Twisted Metal 1, I will be judging the text and video endings together to make it easier, but remember, the text endings are the canonical ones. The lost video endings are just the icing on the cake. Also, may I remind you, rankings of any kind are subjective. Our opinions might differ, but that's okay. Regardless of which form of ending you are looking at, by far the worst from Twisted Metal 1 in my mind is Dave and Mike's, the drivers of Hammerhead. They're a couple of high school dropouts with a single brain cell between them. In the text ending, all they want are new tires for their monster truck, and when they get them, they drive off, vowing to enter the competition the next year to get something else if they win. I don't know, maybe a new coat of paint or an updated interior. They struggle to come up with a better wish than the one they just made, though. In the lost video ending, they just ask for the babes in bikinis standing at the base of Calypso's throne. So yeah, both these endings lead nowhere. They want either rubber or plastic. Very hollow. Even though Sweet Tooth would be fleshed out a great deal in later games, his ending in the original Twisted Metal is pretty dull, all things considered. It's not one of the stronger or interesting ones, in my opinion. His wish is to be reunited with his best friend in the whole world, Crazy Harold, the wacky lunch sack. Calypso is insulted that his vast powers are being used to obtain a paper bag, but in the deranged mind of Needles Kane, it's so much more than that. Needles drives off into the night with paper bag in hand to find and kill more victims. The ending is weird and psychotic, which fits the character, and following the recent release of the Twisted Metal TV series, Harold the Wacky Lunch Sack has grown pretty popular, but Sweet Tooth would be given so many more stronger endings and storylines throughout this series moving forward. This one feels very plain and basic to me. I think having it be just text without any visuals holds it back. In the Lost ending, it's injected with far more camp due to the scenery-chewing performances, and there is some action with the unhinged Needles opening fire on Calypso and his goons, but I don't like the idea of him having a hostage in the passenger seat, implying that she had been there throughout the entire tournament, how easily she's able to free herself from her restraints, and that a gun is conveniently placed on the dashboard in front of her so she can attack Needles and steal his truck. It's all too goofy and not well thought out. Bruce's ending, the driver of Thumper, is pretty straightforward. He wants to save his neighborhood from the gang violence that has been threatening it, a noble cause. In the original text ending, he meets with Calypso in his underground garage, and gets his wish. Bruce is reluctant to believe Calypso, but he races home and finds his neighborhood safe. Calypso was a man of his word. This is one of the rare instances where Calypso uses his power to grant a wish without any obvious strings attached. It's a way for him to flex his muscles, show the player that he can make good on his ward, but that 9 times out of 10 he simply won't, because he doesn't have to. The lost ending for Bruce is quite different from the original, and it's the inferior one, in my opinion. It's revealed that Bruce was a former hitman and that his girlfriend had been kidnapped. He wishes to get her back, and Calypso throws in a bonus, giving Bruce the opportunity to kill the man responsible, his ex-employer. Being the bigger man, Bruce decides not to end the man's life, and drives away. Feeling it was anticlimactic, Calypso pulls out a gun and kills the man instead. The video ending sounds more layered than the original one, but the awkward way it's shot and acted doesn't do it any favors, which is why I don't like it as much. These next two are connected. Warthog's ending has Commander Mason asking Calypso for a top-secret flight recorder box from a plane that went down in Arizona. He claims that its contents have the capability of destroying the world. Commander Mason was sent by the government to keep the secret safe. His video ending plays out the exact same. We learn what the secret was in Crimson Fury's ending. Agent Stone gains possession of the mysterious flight recorder box from the downed airliner, and listening to the audio reveals that it had been shot down by an alien spacecraft. Agent Stone was hired to retrieve the box and release its information to the world. It's a neat little slice of science fiction that raises more questions. In Crimson Fury's lost ending, the actor for Agent Stone isn't seen, nor is his red sports car. It would have been far too expensive to rent one for the shoot. It feels the cheapest and most half-assed out of all the lost endings. This next one is kinda cool. Pit Viper's driver, Angelina Fortin, seemingly wants $1 million cash as her prize, a logical request for having gone through such a strenuous and life-threatening ordeal, but it turns out her name is just an alias, and she's really a freelance assassin named Agent Amanda X, who has been sent by the people of Los Angeles to kill Calypso and his men, and stop the Twisted Metal tournament once and for all. She opens fire and succeeds in her mission, the only survivor being a large, dark, shadowy figure. More on him a little later. I like this ending because it's LA fighting back against Calypso and putting an end to his violent competition, good triumphant over evil. Pit Viper's lost ending is similar, except Calypso survives his injuries, sneaks into the passenger seat of her dune buggy, and one could assume she is killed by him as the screen fades to black. So instead of the hero winning, the villain does, getting the last laugh. Now we're getting into the cream of the crop. I think the endings for Scott Campbell's Spectre are really interesting and show two different outcomes, two extremes. Campbell's wish is to be alive again. He was killed 5 years ago by Needles Kane at a circus. Campbell's soul has been aimlessly wandering the earth ever since, and he views the Twisted Metal tournament as his only shot to come back to life. In the game's original ending, Calypso grants his wish, and in a flash of bright light, Campbell is resurrected, racing home to be with his family and see his daughter, who had been born 3 days after he died. It's the happiest an ending in the Twisted Metal series ever got, unless of course after 5 years his wife or girlfriend moved on to someone else. That would suck. In the Lost ending, it's a complete reversal, not a happy one, but tragic and cruel. Calypso grants his wish, giving him this magic serum that brings him back to the land of the living, but like the fuckface asshole he is, double-crosses Scott and shoots him dead, returning him to ghost form and telling Campbell to try again next year, adding insult to injury. Both endings for this character are great. I like them both. One of them is hopeful and the other tragic. Roadkill's ending is pretty sweet. I love the dark twist it has. It's effective. Captain Spears wants to travel back in time to save his platoon from an ambush he sent them into in South America. In both versions of his ending, Calypso tries to convince Spears not to wish for that, to not go, but Spears has none of it. He gets sent back in time, saves his men, but the cost is steep, his own life. The original ending continues by saying that Captain Spears' car is stolen by two high schoolers, presumably Dave and Mike, who plan on using it to win next year's Twisted Metal competition. I think Roadkill has the harshest of all the endings in the original Twisted Metal, and a scenario that would be essentially remade for a different character in Twisted Metal Black. Next up is Darkseid, Mr. Ash. This ending is very simple and honestly shouldn't be as high on the list as it is. Ash wants to reclaim something Calypso had stolen from him, a powerful demon named Black that Calypso had used to gather all of the prizes for his competition, meaning Calypso may not be as strong as he claims, at least not in Twisted Metal 1. Mr. Ash absorbs Black back into his body and travels back to hell with him. The game says the expressway leading there is located near Hollywood. Hilarious. The reason this ending is so high on my ranking is because of the lost version of it. I love how Mr. Ash's figure walks out from the shine of his semi's headlights. So ominous. Ash states that Black is the most powerful demon he had ever created, and opens up this strange container emitting a glowing green light from inside of it. Black is then pulled inside, but the way it's shot is pure fucking gold. Whoever was wearing the cheap costume for Black just sways back and forth like a Mortal Kombat fatality. It's amazing. The Mr. Ash performer hams it up, laughing maniacally, and the guy playing Calypso, Charles Lance, screams like his heart is being torn out of his chest. This ending is just awesome. 10 out of 10 across the board. Watch it if you haven't before. It's a dumb masterpiece. The ending for Charlie Kane Yellow Jacket is one of my personal favorites from Twisted Metal 1. Charlie wants to know what happened to his son, who disappeared 20 years ago. He confronts Calypso about it and learns the horrifying truth that his son has become the notorious serial killer Sweet Tooth, one of Charlie's victims in his quest to win the Twisted Metal tournament. This discovery has left Charlie devastated and regretting the wish he has made, wonders if he can win the next year's competition so he can ask Calypso to take away his pain, make him forget. The lost ending for the character is just as good as the original in my opinion. Charlie is a tired old man who saw the Twisted Metal tournament as a way for him to drive again. He misses it. Calypso is impressed by his skills, calling them the best he has ever seen. Charlie knows he will die soon, and Calypso offers him immortality. Charlie drinks a serum and becomes a talent scout for Calypso. His job is to drive around the world in search of new competitors for Twisted Metal. Pretty cool, and I guess a way to explain why Yellow Jacket wasn't in the next few iterations of the tournament. He was working for Calypso, finding all of the drivers. Mr. Grimm's ending in Twisted Metal 1 is one of the simplest yet effective endings in the whole series. His name, as well as the fact that he calls upon spirits from the other side, make it apparent that there is more to him than meets the eye. And there is. Mr. Grimm is Death, the Grim Reaper. There's a holy shit moment with that realization when you play this game for the first time. His goal is to win the Twisted Metal tournament and claim the soul of Calypso, who has managed to escape his clutches for 100 years. It seems that some sort of deal had been made between the two of them. The way he lifts his arm up, points his finger, his leather jacket reveals bone, and he says, "You, Calypso, are my prize," still gives me goosebumps after all these years. And I think Mr. Grimm's lost ending is the only one that truly manages to surpass the original. Having the physical skeleton arm prop makes it a lot scarier. There's a mystique to his true appearance, blanketed in shadow behind his helmet. And I love how Calypso is chained to the back back of his motorcycle as he drives off. It's up for debate, but the greatest ending in the first Twisted Metal, in my opinion, is the one for Outlaw, driven by Sergeant Carol Roberts. It was the first and still one of the best examples of Calypso twisting the words and meaning behind a competitor's wish, something we would see happen more and more as the series continued. Though Twisted Metal has never been a franchise known for its strong, canonical timeline, there isn't one. Every game is separate, and every vehicle, every driver can win each Twisted Metal competition. Outlaw's ending is significant because it's the only one that carried over and was followed up in Twisted Metal 2. Sergeant Roberts' wish is to make the streets of LA safe, to rid the world of Calypso's Twisted Metal tournament for good. Calypso clearly disagrees with his request, but is bound to honor it, letting the officer leave his underground lair and re-enter the world free of the pain and suffering of Twisted Metal. But when the officer leaves, he finds himself not only free of Twisted Metal, but the entire planet Earth. Inside his patrol car, Sergeant Roberts drifts aimlessly in outer space for all eternity, kept alive by Calypso's magic. It's an image that has forever been ingrained in my mind. The lost video ending for Outlaw is exactly the same, but nowhere near as resonating as the text one was. When Sergeant Roberts leaves Calypso's lair, it just fades to black, with his screams heard in the background. Calypso also has to explain to the player what's happening. I'm sure some kind of visual would have been added in later, but then again, due to budgetary constraints, maybe not. This concludes my review of the original Twisted Metal. It's very clunky on the gameplay side of things with how the cars control, and some aspects of it that lack polish, especially its visuals, have become extremely dated at this point. But I do still enjoy it. It has its charm, and it's definitely not the worst the franchise has to offer. I think Twisted Metal 1 is still a solid game to revisit, one of my favorites in the franchise that I have an even greater appreciation for. There's a lot of fun to be had, even if it is a bit primitive, and it still oozes the attitude and grit of what makes Twisted Metal so special in the first place. Moving on to Twisted Metal 2, known as Twisted Metal World Tour in Europe. This one was a noticeable improvement over the original game. From the moment you start it up, it's clear that Single Track was given more time and money to develop this one following the previous game's success. The visuals and overall presentation in Twisted Metal 2 is a lot more colorful and appealing. While it uses the same game engine and core mechanics as its predecessor, the cars still control like ass, like they're sliding on ice. There were some gameplay additions that made everything run a lot smoother. Twisted Metal 2 introduced health pickups that were placed in specific areas of each level, respawning after a set period of time. These made obtaining health a lot easier than in the first game, when you had to drive onto those awkward health stations. Depending on how bulky your vehicle was, or how fast, you could sometimes overshoot it, would hit the 4 pillars surrounding it, or become stuck on some nearby obstruction like a tree. It led to a lot of frustrating deaths. A huge visual upgrade was made to all of the weapon pickups, and it's probably the most essential change from Twisted Metal 2 if you think about it. Every weapon pickup has a distinct shape and color to it now, not just simple text, so you know exactly what weapon it is long before you even drive into it. It's much easier to build and customize the right inventory of weapons you want at any given time, and I think it helps keep the action in the game very tight. Twisted Metal 2 also marked the debut of staple weapon types that would find themselves in all of the installments moving forward, like Napalm and Ricochet. Another vital quality of life upgrade made in Twisted Metal 2 was that the cars could now fully rotate in any direction without needing forward or backward momentum. This made absolute sense because these games are less about driving and more about combat. You're essentially controlling a turret, one that happens to be a car as well. With how fast the action can get in these games, it's important to be able to turn your vehicle and line up shots against against your opponents, whether you're moving or not. This crucial stationary turn would be implemented in most Twisted Metal games moving forward. Something else introduced in Twisted Metal 2 that would carry over into future games were the new energy attacks. These use sequences of directional button presses that are universal to every vehicle, that allow you to fire freeze missiles, jump, activate temporary shields, perform rear attacks, and go invisible. The list of abilities for these energy attacks would vary throughout the Twisted Metal series, but all functioned the exact same. While a weird concept to wrap your head around at first, they do add a whole new layer to the gameplay. The jump gave you new ways of exploring the levels, which featured even more unique gimmicks to them and hidden areas, accessible through portals, containing stronger weapons. Being able to temporarily shield yourself or go invisible gives you more defensive options when avoiding damage or racing to collect health pickups, and firing a freeze missile to trap your opponent and then combo off of it with other weapons, emptying your entire weapon pool, is satisfying as hell. Because you drive using the directional buttons though, I find the game doesn't always register your inputs as often as it should. As great and fun as Twisted Metal 2 is, with all the improvements it makes to the gameplay, my biggest complaint with it has to do with something I briefly mentioned when talking about the first game. These early Twisted Metals developed by SingleTrack, even some of the later entries that had many of the same developers working on them, have pretty poor AI. Your opponents focus all of their attention on you and you alone, only attacking each other out of sheer luck if the odd missile or machine gun round they fire happens to miss its intended target. It's not so bad and noticeable in the original Twisted Metal, even the later games I'm referring to, like Twisted Metal Black and 2012, but in Twisted Metal 2, it's the worst the franchise ever got. You feel completely handicapped in a lot of the matches you have. Opponents can become far too aggressive against you, swarming you and spamming one too many freeze missiles to lock you in place. Without question, Twisted Metal 2 is the hardest game in the series, but for all the wrong reasons. I think the spike in its difficulty was done to pad out the game's length and increase its longevity, but it's the only Twisted Metal that has me inputting level passwords after almost every stage, and I've been playing it for many years now. I can still beat it without infinite ammo or health, but it's a hard son of a bitch at the end of the day, a struggle from start to finish. Twisted Metal 2 has an expanded character roster, 2 more than the original game, with a grand total of 14. 7 vehicles return from the first game, and many have been given visual overhauls. You've got Roadkill, a car made up of junk parts of others, driven by a homeless man on the brink of insanity named Marcus. Its special weapon is called the Boomerang Blast, a missile that returns to the vehicle with increased damage if it misses. Hammerhead, the monster truck, with a new paint job and decals covering it. It's driven by another pair of teenagers named Mike and Stu. Its special weapon remained the same. It crushes its opponents under its massive tires. Outlaw 2 is driven by Captain Jamie Roberts, sister of Sergeant Carl Roberts, who disappeared after winning the tournament the previous year. The 360-degree Omni Taser remains the special weapon of Outlaw in this game. You've got Warthog, the military jeep. This time around, it's driven by an old Army veteran named Captain Rogers, who is over 100 years old. They make him look like a living corpse. I'm surprised he doesn't die of a heart attack or break his hip or spine from all the impacts his vehicle would take during the contest. The Patriot missiles are his vehicle's special weapon, returning from the original game. Mr. Grimm's motorcycle has a sidecar attached to it now, with a mounted gun coming out of it. He's still depicted as the Grim Reaper. His special weapon is one of the strongest in the game, called the Screaming Soul. The Lowrider Thumper is another returning character, still driven by Bruce Cochran, and still wielding an incredibly strong flamethrower attack. The final starting vehicle that carries over from the first game is the sports car Spectre. Instead of being driven by a ghost, it's driven by an actor named Ken Masters, not to be confused with Ken Masters from the Street Fighter series. Spectre's special weapon is still the always awesome ghost missile that homes in on enemies, even through walls. The Dune Buggy Pit Viper from Twisted Metal 1 has been replaced with the more colorful Grasshopper in Twisted Metal 2, driven by the teenager Krista Sparks. The vehicle's special weapon has it leap into the air before crashing down on its opponents. Twister is a Formula One race car driven by Amanda Watts. It is one of my favorite special weapons in the series. It creates a tornado around itself which sucks in nearby vehicles, slamming them into walls and other enemies for increased damage. It's one of the most annoying special moves to be on the receiving end of, so disorienting. Mr. Slam is a giant front-loader construction vehicle driven by a disgruntled architect named Simon Whittlebone. Its special weapon has it pick up its opponents and slam them into the ground numerous times. Shadow is a purple hearse driven by the gothic Mortimer. It launches a soul out of it that can be detonated to increase its blast radius. And finally, we have Axel, one of the most recognizable characters in the Twisted Metal series, making his first appearance in Twisted Metal 2. He's a man trapped in a two-wheeled machine. You have to suspend your disbelief with this one. His body is wide open to attack, and he would be dead within seconds if this tournament were real. Axel's special weapon has been unchanged in all of the appearances this character has made. It's an area of effect blast, good for crowd control. There are two unlockable characters through cheat codes. The first is of course the ice cream truck Sweet Tooth. I think this is my favorite vehicle design he has ever had. It's the same from the first game, just more polished looking, a simple block shape. The clown head on top doesn't look weird either, like in some of the later installments. The Napalm Cone Launcher returns as his special weapon, with a bit more homing capability this time around. This was the first game to give Needles Cane flaming hair as well, though no story explanation for it was given. The other unlockable character is Minion, in all of his terrifying glory. His tank is huge and barely fits on the selection screen. Minion the Demon is also given a physical appearance for the first time in the franchise. The tank is given its own special weapon in this game, and it's definitely the most devastating out of them all, a group of 3 homing missiles with a freeze missile mixed in for good measure. Twisted Metal 2 takes place on Christmas Eve in 2006, exactly 1 year after the events of the first game. Calypso looks down upon the ruins of Los Angeles from inside his blimp, making its official debut. Since LA has been completely destroyed, he wonders where this year's Twisted Metal competition, the 11th overall, will take place. He has a sick eureka moment and decides that the entire world will serve as its battleground. The Twisted Metal tournament is going global. You'll notice immediately that the level design in Twisted Metal 2 is head and shoulders above what was found in the original game. They each have unique gimmicks to them, secret areas, Easter eggs, breakable objects, and even environmental attacks that you can perform for additional damage, if you can locate the special pickups for them and position your opponents correctly. Before each level, you see a spinning globe with a reticle showing you the next target location. Twisted Metal 2 starts off really strong. The first stage is Los Angeles, Quake Zone Rumble. You battle outside Hollywood within the ruins of the city following an earthquake and its destruction in the first game. There is a partial highway, destroyed buildings, and a burning fire pit. You take on 6 opponents in this level, making it far more challenging than the one-on-one encounter that opens the first game. Twisted Metal 2 sort of pushes you right into the deep end from the get-go. Supposedly, Darkseid was intended to be a boss in this level, but the idea never came to fruition. The character was not included in this game. Level 2 is probably my least favorite in Twisted Metal 2, the missile silo in Moscow. While not terrible, I just think it's a bit too small and restrictive. The AI usually drives over the only health pickup immediately, so it takes a while before it respawns. It's kind of a mess. It can be fun using the ricochet weapon that bounces off the walls to turn the arena into a death trap though. Weapon pickups also appear within the purple beam in the center. Paris is one of the more memorable and endearing levels in franchise history. Not only is its soundtrack a kick-ass rock version of Frere Jacques, but it's got a lot of variety to its design. The city on the one side, the river Seine in the middle, and then of course the Eiffel Tower you can fight around the base of or teleport yourself up to. Using a remote bomb, you can destroy the upper section of the tower, which I believe was controversial at the time, creating a bridge that opens up the rooftops of the city as well, essentially adding an entirely new level to a pre-existing one. Paris' monumental disaster is just so dynamic as the battle rages on. I think it's not only the best level in Twisted Metal 2, but one of the best in the entire Twisted Metal series. Level 4 marks the halfway point of the tournament. It's set in Amazonia in South America. It's called Firewalk due to the molten lava of a volcano surrounding the battleground. If you drive over the lava, your vehicle will take damage. I've always found this stage to be a bit ridiculous. The cars and their wheels would melt unless they had powerful state-of-the-art air conditioning systems. The drivers, especially Axel with his hands bound and body exposed, would die from heat exhaustion, but that's what makes these games fun. They don't always have to make sense. After defeating all 6 of your opponents here, you take on the first boss of the game, the demon from hell named Minion, who rises out of the lava to seek revenge against Calypso. I think having Minion be the final boss of this level was genius. He's just as OP as he was in the first game, and this time you can't knock him off rooftops for easy damage, so buckle up, you're in for the fight of your life. I'm probably gonna get some hate for this, but the New York level in Twisted Metal 2 isn't one of my favorites. I think it's one of the weaker rooftop stages in the series. As much as destroying the Statue of Liberty, revealing a red bikini is funny, and flying off the numerous jumps and crashing through the office windows and hotel lobbies is cool, the slippery driving controls and bouncy ball physics to the vehicles cause you to fall a lot and lose lives. It detracts from my enjoyment of the level. I'm unable to take it all in and truly admire its design because I'm so preoccupied with not falling off the buildings. I know that's the whole point of this level, having falling be a constant hazard around you, setting it apart from most of the others, but the gameplay, physics, and aggressive enemy AI in Twisted Metal 2 don't lend themselves to this idea as well as some other games in the series do, like Black, 2012, or hell, the original Twisted Metal for that matter. I don't find myself falling off the buildings anywhere near as much in those games. It happens, of course, but not so frequently that it stops you from just enjoying the stage you're in and having fun. Again, I'm probably gonna get hate for all this. The New York level in Twisted Metal 2 is considered a classic. I just think it's a bit broken with how the vehicles handle. Level 6 is Antarctica, the Drop Zone, another iconic level from the series with great theming and a memorable twist to it. This level can be extremely annoying and unforgiving, but can also result in some of the most intense car combat the franchise has ever seen. You want to end the fight as quickly as possible, because the longer it goes on, chunks of the frozen island you are driving on will break off and fall into the ocean, removing from play useful health and ammo pickups, and reducing the total size of the battle arena. The space you have at your disposal just shrinks and shrinks. It becomes claustrophobic. It's almost bumper to bumper by the end. The penultimate level in Twisted Metal 2 is Holland Field of Screams. Depending on who you ask, this is either one of the best levels in the Twisted Metal series or one of the worst. I lean more towards the former due to the immense challenge it poses. In it, you have to defeat a whopping 9 opponents. Holland is a literal square, very small with little cover, aside from a couple windmills that can be destroyed, so you take damage from all sides. It's utter chaos with missiles and special weapons flying everywhere. It's essential that you keep moving to survive, and utilize your energy attacks when necessary. If not for the highly memorable Eiffel Tower set piece in the Paris level, Holland would be my absolute favorite in Twisted Metal 2. It's very challenging, but so much fun and satisfying to endure. The final stage of this year's tournament is set in the streets of Hong Kong. You can drive through its subway tunnels, in its harbor, and there's even a higher temple section that hoses an environmental lightning attack you can use against your foes. After beating the final 8 enemy vehicles, you take on Darktooth, Sweet Tooth's father. He emerges from the sewers, enraged that you killed his little clown boy. He drives a massively upgraded version of Sweet Tooth's ice cream truck. The fucking thing is ginormous. You feel like an ant next to it. Though not made clear, one could assume that the driver of Darktooth is Charlie Kane, the driver of Yellow Jacket in the original game. He is revealed to be the father of Sweet Tooth at the end of Twisted Metal 1, though I don't know why he would be hiding in the sewers of Hong Kong, or why he would even care about the fate of his son at this point. He didn't take too kindly to the revelation that Needles had become a serial killer in the first game. In fact, he wanted to forget about it. Then again, all of the Twisted Metal games exist within their own timelines anyways. Drivers of a lot of their vehicles never stayed the same for one reason or another, so none of what I'm saying really matters. Regardless of who is driving the vehicle, Darktooth in Twisted Metal 2 is, in my opinion, the greatest final boss in the history of the series. Very imposing, very frightening. I feel a lot of the later games would overcomplicate the final bosses, either making them someone or something with very little or non-existent backstories, or some large and impractical vehicular monstrosity that negatively impacted the core gameplay and just ended up not being fun to sit through. Darktooth in Twisted Metal 2 had the perfect balance. It also had a memorable surprise to it. After beating him, just when you thought it was all over, the giant clown head on top of the truck would fly towards you, essentially a boss battle within a boss battle. No one was expecting it. Moving on now to the character endings in the game, and my rankings of them. Like always, this sort of thing is subjective. You may have different favorites than mine. The characters and how they are written in Twisted Metal 2 are vastly superior to the ones in the first game. While many of the drivers are still simplistic, wacky, and cliché, they are at least, collectively, a more layered and interesting group of individuals. The endings in Twisted Metal 2, much like the game's introduction, are made using 2D animated drawings of the characters, which is a step up from the static image of Calypso, with text scrolling over top that was in the first game. Using a style of animation like this was a brilliant move on the part of Singletrack. Not only is it cheaper than traditional cutscenes using 3D models, but it gives the endings in this game a surreal look and feel to them. They can accomplish more in them than 3D animation or even live action could, especially at the time. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear that I don't think any of the endings in Twisted Metal 2 are bad. Collectively, they are the best in the franchise, but the one I enjoy the least in Twisted Metal 2 would have to be Minions, just for how quick and straightforward it is, lacking any sort of clever twist like the other characters. Minion is pissed that Calypso stole his power 11 years ago, and as punishment, throws him in a pit leading to hell. That's it. The ending lasts like half a minute, and it makes reference to events that transpired in the very rare tie-in comic released for the game in 1996, published by DC. Only 100 copies of it were ever made, many of which have been damaged or destroyed at this point, but they're highly sought after by die-hard Twisted Metal fans, and a pristine copy is worth thousands. Here's another ending I don't enjoy as much as the rest. In the first game, Bruce was a heroic character, wanting to save his neighborhood from the violence plaguing it. In Twisted Metal 2, he has an about face, and wants to rule the entire world, a bit of an extreme. When Calypso grants his wish, he finds that he rules a planet of rubble, destroyed by the Twisted Metal tournament, and screams commands to lifeless subjects. I didn't like Hammerhead's ending in the original game because it was just pointless and stupid. In Twisted Metal 2, it's also stupid, but in a fun way, and Calypso gets to show off his classic douchebaggery. Being teenage sleazeballs, Mike and Stu want to gain the ability to fly, so they can see down women's shirts. Calypso grants their wish. Without hesitation, they jump off the roof they are on, quickly realize they can't fly, and sadly fall to their deaths. Calypso then tells himself he's glad these plane tickets are refundable. It's a case of being too gung-ho and naive on the part of Mike and Stu. They weren't using their heads, and their phrasing was easily turned against them by Calypso. Warthog's ending is pretty hilarious and another great double-cross on the part of Calypso. Captain Rogers' bio page would imply that his quest is immortality, to extend his life, but in his ending, he begs Calypso to give him the body of a 20-year-old, a poor choice of words. Calypso gives him the body of a 20-year-old, but not the head to match, and says he can always ask for that next year. Ouch. Moving on now to Mortimer's ending, the driver of Shadow. He's a hearse driver and a keeper of lost souls. His ending is sort of like Pit Viper's from the original game, in that he has been hired to enact revenge against Calypso by the countless victims of the Twisted Metal tournament, those caught in its crossfire. I enjoy these ones that have them fighting back against Calypso in some way. In an interesting turn of events, Mortimer doesn't come to Calypso with a wish. He comes to him bearing a gift. He opens the door of his hearse, and the souls of Calypso's victims carry him away. Some believe he had been dropped from high above and died. Others believe he is still being carried through the skies as we speak. But Calypso managed to escape the lost souls by clinging on to the wing of a passenger plane. Mr. Slam's ending is one of my favorites in the series that always pops into my head when I think of Twisted Metal 2. Simon Whittlebone was an architect fired from his job for wanting to build a tower that could reach the heavens. Calypso gives him the power to build this tower, and he does. Within days, it's taller than any building known to man. But, worried that someone could build something taller, his immense hubris has him keep going and going. Standing on top of his behemoth creation, he declares himself God. However, like Icarus, who flew too close to the sun, Whittlebone loses his footing and falls for miles, crashing into the earth and leaving a large crater. His body would have been turned to soup, though. In last year's Twisted Metal competition, Mr. Grimm was after the soul of Calypso. In Twisted Metal 2, he wants to feed on the souls of everyone. He becomes a soul junkie, addicted to death. Humans are not dying fast enough to satiate his hunger, and he asks Calypso to speed up the process. The world becomes hell on earth, and the human population is completely eradicated by war. Mr. Grimm has a bountiful feast, but it doesn't last forever. Like any high, the more you have, the more the body needs to reach it again. Mr. Grimm is left in a state of withdrawal, begging Calypso for more souls that just aren't there. So Twister's ending is kinda nuts. Amanda Watts is a race car driver, an adrenaline junkie, who wants to find a special place where time and space explode when you go a certain speed. Calypso gives her what she wants, to go the speed of light, faster than anyone ever has before. Amanda would find herself traveling through time, the Old West, the age of the pirates, and then runs out of gas in the Cretaceous period, coming face to face with a T-Rex that squashes her under its foot. Millions of years later, her fossilized cracked helmet sits in a history museum, confusing the world of science and evolution. But to Calypso, who knows the truth, it's a reminder of a woman obsessed with pushing the limits. I find it funny that a helmet like that could survive all those years without breaking down. It raises so many questions. What if a major brand logo was on it? I'd love to see the company who made it being questioned over its existence and be utterly speechless. Marcus, the driver of Roadkill, is an intriguing one. On his biography page, he is speaking directly to the player, telling them that people call him crazy, but he knows the truth, that all of this is just a dream, a game. After winning the Twisted Metal tournament, he begs Calypso to set him free. Interestingly, Calypso says he always knew he would figure it out, granting his wish and telling him to come back and visit the rest of his friends any time. Marcus then awakens from a coma he had been in, a horrific highway accident, along with many other familiar faces, those he had fought in the Twisted Metal competition. His family hugs him, but an ominous image of Calypso can be seen, implying that there is an even darker truth to this story, that all of this, everything he sees, may be a fabrication. It's hard to definitively rank Marcus's ending based on what we were shown in Twisted Metal 2, because there was more that would be explored with this character in later entries in relation to Sweet Tooth, making the character of Marcus a lot more significant than he was here. I don't know how much of it was planned from the get-go though, but as is, I enjoy Roadkill's ending. I love the idea of Marcus being this seemingly deranged, tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist, believing that the world around him is some sort of simulation. I like how all the other Twisted Metal contestants are in comas as well. It would have you believe that all of them are victims of circumstance, being manipulated by Calypso, forced to participate in this nightmarish world of Twisted Metal against their will. Outlaw 2's ending is great, and the only one in this game that clearly follows up on one from the original game. The year prior, Captain Roberts' brother had been sent spiraling aimlessly through outer space in his patrol car. Jamie made it her mission to rescue him in this year's tournament. When she wins, she demands that Calypso let her see her brother. Calypso twists her words, and we are made to believe she will be trapped alongside him for all eternity as well. How Carl, or Buzz as he is referred to as in this game, survived without food or water for a year, in outer space no less, is unknown, probably kept alive by Calypso's magic. But Jamie has predicted all of this would happen, has made modifications to her car, and the two rocket themselves back to Earth to get their revenge against Calypso once and for all in next year's tournament. The ending for Ken Masters' Spectre is one of the more entertaining and surreal ones from the entire series. Though he's not a ghost like the driver of Spectre in the first game, he still feels invisible, ignored by the world around him. Ken reveals in his ending cutscene that he's an actor looking for his big break. He wants to be famous and known the world over. Calypso grants his wish and stretches his face, so large that it envelops the planet and replaces the sky, so everyone on Earth can see Ken's face every second of every day. It's a weird ending, but highly memorable and the right kind of wacky for Twisted Metal. Sweet Tooth's ending in the original game felt crazy just for the sake of being crazy. There wasn't much substance to it, but here I think there is. His bio screen has him state that he's lived at the circus, he lived in a mental institute, and his next home will be yours. His ending has him wish to become a tiny bug to live out the rest of his days in peace and relaxation, but it's far from peaceful. He kills the other insects that come near him, and when he feels lonely, all he has to do is look up to find companionship or human flesh. This clown serial killer has found a way to be everywhere, under your bed, in your closet, outside your window. Who knows where he could be next? It's a bizarre concept, that's for sure, but one of the more memorable endings from the Twisted Metal series, in my opinion. It just gets under your skin. Krista Sparks wants to be reunited with her father, William, who she believed had died several years ago. Her intention is to kill him. It's revealed that Krista is the daughter of Calypso. She had been killed in the same car crash that had disfigured his face. Calypso realizes that Krista is a cyborg built with the remains of her body by the LAPD. They knew she would be able to get close to Calypso and planted a bomb inside of her to kill him and put an end to his Twisted Metal tournament. Krista, in her final moments, scared that the explosion will hurt, is hugged by her father. It's the rare instance in this series that Calypso shows any real human emotion, that we are made aware of what he once was before becoming a devilish harvester of souls. One of the most iconic endings in Twisted Metal history, and honestly, the one I consider to be the franchise's best, is Axel's from Twisted Metal 2. Axel is a man who has been bound to his wheeled machine for 20 years and seeks revenge against the man who put him in it. We come to learn that this man is his father. He trapped Axel in the machine because he thought he was too slow and too stupid. He believes it will take another 10 years locked in the contraption to set Axel right. Choosing to take control of his own life and choose freedom, Axel proceeds to rip his own arms off in front of his father in an act of defiance. It makes me wonder if his legs were bound to the machine too and would have to be ripped off as well. But regardless, it's a powerful image that sticks with you. Axel choosing to bleed out and die as a free man rather than continue living as a caged one. To sum up my thoughts on Twisted Metal 2, while it may not be my personal favorite installment in the series, I believe it is, from an objective stance, the best entry in the series. I think aesthetically, its design is what every Twisted Metal game should aspire to be. It's the perfect blend of colorful, funny, and sadistic, everything I want in a Twisted Metal game. Its slippery and bouncy controls take a while to get used to. The AI can be a bit cheap and challenging, but the changes Twisted Metal 2 made to the series formula, the gameplay was incredible, stuff that has been carried over into every Twisted Metal game ever since. The level design across the board is the best the franchise has ever seen too. Having the tournament take place all around the world ensured every battleground in Twisted Metal 2 felt unique. They were made interesting with their variety of gimmicks, sizes, and set pieces, testing your skills in so many fun ways. And of course, the characters and their stories, though cliché, campy, and simple in a few areas, were still of the highest quality, all making relative sense given the wishes, and all in all, were highly memorable. I want to thank you all for tuning in and watching this, the first of a planned 6 parts in my retrospective series on Twisted Metal. Some of these installments in this series will be looking at multiple games, and will be close to or surpassing an hour in length. Others will be looking at individual Twisted Metal entries, whatever I deem necessary, if I feel the games I am discussing deserve to be grouped in with others or not. You might assume I'm just going to talk about each one in the order that they were released in too, but that will not always be the case. All I can say is stay tuned and keep on the lookout for more of my uploads. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell icon for notifications. This video was an experiment. I'm curious to see how well it performs because it's a radical departure from all the other stuff I talk about on my channel. Let me know what you think about the Twisted Metal games, as well as any memories you have of them down in the comment section below. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and always stay nerdy.